Hello, my name is Cassandra Delgado, and I am a certified prosthetist orthotist currently practicing in the United States. Today, I'm excited to share new research where we will discuss the functional comparison and social perception of a new orthotic intervention for idiopathic toe walking in children. I would like to acknowledge the support that we received from Coyote, based out of Boise, Idaho, for their provision of the raw materials for this research, as well as Prosthetic and Orthotic Associates in New York for their ability to allow us to perform this research in their clinic. Let's start with the historical significance of toe walking. So we know that school-age children with autism spectrum disorder can continue to idiopathic toe walk even years after wearing orthotic intervention. So these children are fit with various orthotic designs, and then even after years of wearing them, when we take the AFOs off, the children continue to walk on their toes in an excessive plantar flexed orientation. Now, this can cause compliance to be a challenge for parents. They don't know if they always see the end result. They know that it's kind of helping prevent some potential deformities in the feet, but it can be quite a challenge whenever we have children on the autism spectrum needing to wear orthotic intervention, but it being difficult for the families to do so for a wide variety of reasons. One of those reasons can be that traditional rigid orthotic intervention interferes with the sensory seeking input. So a lot of these children will walk on their toes as a way of stimulating or helping them process their environment. So some children will do this with verbal or other physical motions, and some do it as excessive toe walking to help with that external stimulus that they are experiencing. So when we don't allow them to have this stimulation by putting them in a very rigid orthotic design, this can exacerbate some of these sensory avoidant behaviors because they're not able to regulate as easily their environment as they once did. So not every child on the autism spectrum has a sensory processing disorder. However, many do, and especially those who present with idiopathic toe walking. This sensory regulation is something that causes a sense of overload to where the individuals will have certain different types of stimulation that they utilize to be able to process their environment. A lot of this sensory dysregulation has been heavily studied, but we still don't always have all of the answers as to why certain behaviors or activities are necessary for a child to be able to navigate their environment with ease. So I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of various individuals and children on the autism spectrum. And because of this, I have seen the struggle that both these patients and their families have gone through while trying to be consistent and compliant with their orthotic intervention. My goal was to really see what else do we have out there that we can offer these families and these children to ensure that they have a good experience while also reaching our orthotic goals. So the purpose of this study was to determine if an alternative design of orthotic intervention with increased dynamic movement could influence sensory modulation and compliance in subjects with sensory processing disorders. I also wanted to see if the alternative design would have any carryover effect. So would we see the individuals start to walk in more of a heel-to-toe pattern once the orthotic intervention was removed? Would we have any lasting effects outside of orthotic intervention? And then also to see if the alternative design influences some of the subject's social perceptions. Many of these individuals also struggle with the social perception of wearing orthotic intervention, and seeing if a new, potentially low-profile design would be more beneficial for these individuals' compliance. There were 12 participants total in this study who were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and idiopathic toe walking. They were between the ages of 8 to 12 years old and weighed between 70 to 110 pounds. This weight was specifically chosen based on the manufacturer's recommendations for the orthotic interventions selected. We also wanted all of these individuals to have the same prior orthotic intervention. So they all had a history of being fit with bilateral articulated AFOs with 90-degree plantar flexion stops. Their current AFOs must have been fitted within the past 3 to 6 months to ensure that they fit throughout the course of the study. We also wanted feedback from the individuals themselves, so with some ability to communicate, to be able to express their preferences and provide feedback. This could be done through verbal, nonverbal communication, augmentative or alternative communication, such as an AAC board as well. Exclusionary criteria were plantar flexion contractures greater than 5 degrees, any additional diagnoses known to cause toe walking or other foot deformities, and the inability to complete outcome measures. So each of the subjects needed to be able to follow instructions to complete all of the necessary outcome measures. The interventional AFO design was the mini dynamic strut from Coyote. The strut was fit based on each patient's weight category. However, all of the patients were fit with a medium flex strut. The strut can be plantar flexed against for navigating the environment. So for children, this helps them achieve tasks throughout their day, especially at school, such as reaching an upper shelf, climbing on playground equipment, and hopefully with the goal to reduce frustration in their environment. They were able to plantar flex approximately 10 degrees in the mini dynamic strut, with the goal to reduce rigid sensory feedback like they experience in the 90-degree plantar flexion stop. They were unable to toe walk consistently in the AFOs, and if for any reason there was a concern that they may be able to plantar flex excessively against the strut, the research team would have then introduced a more rigid level strut based on the size and weight of the child. Various outcome measures were taken during this study. We wanted to assess the range of motion in the lower extremity to see if it improved or worsened, as well as various other standardized tests, including the pediatric 30-second walk test, the reach test, timed up and go stairs, and especially we wanted subjective feedback from parents and the participants themselves. We took outcome measures at various stages throughout this research project. We began with all of the subjects only performing tests barefoot. On the next day, we had them perform the tests again in articulated AFOs, the ones that they had been wearing historically. And we also began tracking their compliance with their current AFOs at this time. We also performed a casting appointment at this intervention to allow for fabrication of the new style of dynamic AFOs. At the next appointment, the dynamic AFOs were fit and a 1-week acclimation period was granted. After that 1 week, we started to have the families track compliance and had the children return for a baseline measurement of the outcome measures with the dynamic struts. We repeated all of these measures again at 1 month and then all of the measures again at 3 months. A very common frustration that I had heard over the years from parents was how challenging getting their child to wear the AFOs consistently was. We wanted to track this compliance and see truly the level of difficulty that they experience every day and if the new orthotic intervention helped with that or had no change or impact. We had the families rank the donning process each morning as they would go to put the AFOs on, either as no difficulty in donning and having the child wear them, challenging but successful, or the child refusing or having a not successful day in trying to put the AFOs on. This happens sometimes where the families would say, we tried to get them on and they were just having a really rough day. So we wanted all of those interactions documented. We also had them document if the child was able to wear them or tolerate them for the average length of a school day, so approximately 8 hours. And then after 3 months of usage for the study, the parents were instructed after the fact to allow the subjects to select what style of AFO they preferred to wear each day. After the study had been completed with all necessary outcome measures, we had the parents allow the subjects or the children themselves to select what orthotic intervention they wanted to wear each day and record this information. For our compliance results, for the easy days when the families had no difficulties putting on the orthotic intervention, we found an increase on average of 14% of these easy days after just the first month of wearing the new style of dynamic strut AFOs. By the end of the 3 months, there was a 27% increase of these easy days compared to the child wearing the traditional articulated AFO style. When looking at just the number of days that were overall refused to wear any type of orthotic intervention, we saw the overall refusal rate decrease by an average of 42% while wearing the dynamic strut compared to the original articulated, meaning that these children were able to tolerate wearing these and getting them on every day with much greater success. Our results also showed that there is no carryover effect at this time, meaning that once the AFOs were removed, subjects continued to toe walk. I hypothesized this because these individuals still require some type of stimulus to help them navigate their environment, considering their sensory processing disorder. It makes sense that these individuals would still seek some sort of input. The range of motion remained relatively unchanged for the overwhelming majority, so for 10 subjects. However, 2 subjects did show an improvement in dorsiflexion range of motion by about 4 degrees and 6 degrees bilaterally. The parents reported that the subjects would oftentimes ask the nurse or perhaps the school physical therapist to remove their AFOs due to discomfort. And so we would want to know if these AFOs had been removed. When wearing the traditional articulated AFOs, we had them worn about 82% of the time, and so therefore 18% of the time they were being removed. When wearing the dynamic strut, we saw this number greatly reduce, and so 91% of the time, children were able to wear the dynamic strut for the full school day. Only 9% of the time had they been removed. One of those instances was because the child did need a modification to an area around the navicular and needed a little heat relief in that area. So it was not due to a sensory concern or being frustrated with wearing their orthotic intervention. We fabricated all of the orthoses out of the same carbon-infused polypropylene plastic material. This material is a dark gray color, so when looking for feedback, one of the subjects preferred to use the articulated AFOs, their previous design, and she was able to say that this was because she liked the colors and patterns of that better compared to the dark gray colors, which makes sense for children. The parents reported also an increased ease of finding proper shoe wear due to reduced bulk. So the strut aspect, where it anchors onto the foot and ankle section, is slightly proximal and outside of typical shoes compared to the joints that they were accustomed to having around the children's ankle, as well as the plantar flexion stop. And so these children are able to wear shoes that more closely resemble those of their peers. Also, there was some refusal to wear the orthotic intervention, mainly around other external factors, such as the child feeling sick or other situational sensory overload that wasn't necessarily because of the orthotic intervention. So some of the parents noted that as well. When looking at our outcome measure results, we found that barefoot performed faster at many of the outcome measure tests than either of the 2 AFO designs. However, this was performed with significant compensatory strategies, and so they were not walking in an optimized gait or alignment. When looking at the 1-month and 3-month assessments, we found that the dynamic strut AFOs allowed for longer distances ambulated during the pediatric 30-second walk test compared to the articulated AFO assessments. There was no significant difference between the 1-month dynamic strut AFO compared to the articulated AFO assessment of the pediatric reach test. However, at the 3-month mark for the dynamic strut, there was an improvement in the pediatric reach test at this time, however, still not significant. There was also no significant difference in outcome measures that were assessed between barefoot walking at the beginning of the study compared to barefoot walking at the end of the study, so relatively unchanged in the barefoot walking. In conclusion, the dynamic strut was found to be an excellent alternative for the traditional articulated or potentially solid ankle AFOs for children on the autism spectrum with sensory processing disorders and presenting with idiopathic toe walking. They were preferred by 11 out of the 12 subjects, again with one of those subjects having a color preference for their old design. And although the dynamic strut AFOs did allow for up to 10 degrees of plantar flexion against the strut, no decrease in range of motion was found. So it was evident that allowing some plantar flexion to perform tasks was beneficial and reduced frustration throughout the course of the day, however, did not negatively impact the patient's lower extremity range of motion. Let's review a quick case presentation. This is Jackson. Jackson is 7 years old and presented with autism spectrum disorder as well as a sensory-seeking type idiopathic toe walking gait. He wore articulated AFOs with 90-degree plantar flexion stops for about 3 years, however struggled immensely with tolerating orthotic intervention for long periods of time, especially during the school day. This is Jackson's very first time walking with the mini dynamic strut AFOs. In my perception of his alignment, he's currently significantly externally rotated. I believe he's looking to find his balance as he is getting propulsion from the strut and helping him go in a more smooth heel-to-toe gait. I wanted him to just continue to walk and allow for a period of acclimation before further assessing his gait. But overall, Jackson during this time is starting to smile, which was an event that did not happen very frequently during our previous orthotic visits. So we allowed Jackson to acclimate to wearing the AFOs for about another 10 minutes, and we found that he had a significant improvement in that toeing out orientation and alignment. He has a much more neutral alignment and was just able to find his balance a little better, as well as his gait speed. So he is walking a little faster and with a little bit more confidence after just 10 minutes of wear. Now this is Jackson 3 months after receiving his AFOs. He wears them every single day to school. He no longer fights with mom and dad to get them on, and every single day has been successful for him wearing to school, which is a drastic improvement in his overall compliance. He's able to put them on independently and is very proud to do so. Also, because of the design being two separate parts, he's significantly less sweaty, the parents report. And so that's another stimulus that had been really bothersome to him, was the amount of sweat that he would have in his lower extremities, and that became very distracting for him and one of the reasons why he would take off his old design. So having more open design helped with that sensory processing and allowed him to be more comfortable. Because of this also, he is tolerating these for over 10 hours a day with improved behavior at school and reduced stress. On the first day, I did ask Jackson if he's able to plantar flex and go up on his toes. And when asking him to do this for the first time, he stumbled slightly because he was not accustomed to the AFOs wanting to prompt him down. So on other attempts, he was able to slightly plantar flex against the strut, again, to reach something on a taller shelf, to hang up a coat, for example. And so he is able to plantar flex against the strut when needed, but due to the manufacturer's recommendations and the slight inclination of the strut during fabrication, it places the patient in more of a alignment where they are not encouraged to be able to spend much time on their toes without tipping over. So the design and the alignment and casting really also help impede the patient from going on their toes with excessive frequency. The family also reports that he's able to go up and down the stairs with much better confidence and stability. He has much better upright posture as well, and he's having fun. He is much more verbal during the appointments and likes to give me a lot of feedback about how his new designed AFOs fit and function for him. At this point in time, Jackson has outgrown his first pair of dynamic strut AFOs, and so we will be graduating him onto a new pair of them so that he can continue to have exceptional outcomes with his orthotic intervention. I'd like to thank and acknowledge the other researchers who have laid a lot of groundwork in helping to understand individuals who present with idiopathic toe walking and ways that we can continue to improve their care. Thank you so very much for listening to our study today. We absolutely love this patient population and truly are grateful for the parents and the subjects that allowed us to continue to explore what other options are out there for these communities. If you would like to reach out to myself or any of our co-authors, please feel free to send me an email down below. We love to discuss or have your feedback or thoughts.